I have a great dad. My dad, one of the signs he was a great dad was when my brother and I were growing up, he showed us a lot of old movies. And so I'm a movie lover myself. And when you sit down and talk about favorite movies, you're going to find a lot of the movies I love were made before I was born. Not all, but a substantial number of them. And a substantial number of those movies were starring a certain guy who you may have heard of named John Wayne. Okay, so I know a lot of you are younger than me, but if you lived between basically 1930 and 1975, he was the biggest thing going in Hollywood. And you know, I can give you, in case you're wondering, my top 5 all-time John Wayne movies: Stagecoach, Red River, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Quiet Man, and most of all, The Searchers. If you haven't seen that one, stream it. It's fantastic. But when you watched his movies, you know, I don't mean any disrespect, he wasn't a great actor because he always basically played the same role. He was always the big, strong, tough, courageous guy. He won every fight. He almost always got the girl. There's one movie where she ends up with Jimmy Stewart instead, which, you know, you can't blame her. But he never showed fear. He never cried. He never showed any weakness of any kind. And that kind of carved out an image of what manhood looks like for men for the next several generations. It really showed us as Americans what courage is supposed to look like and what strength is supposed to look like. And part of the problem with that is there are some people that try to portray that instead of actually living courageously. My dad, who showed me all those movies and who grew up watching those movies, by the time he got to adulthood and was drafted into the Army and served a year in Vietnam in a war zone, of course, and I'm very proud of my dad's service. But one of the things he told me was, you know, in the Army, if you called somebody John Wayne, that wasn't actually an insult. It meant you're pretending to be something you're not. You're swaggering around, you're acting recklessly. I don't want to be standing next to you when the stuff gets real, because you're probably going to die, right? You're just not smart. And what it shows is there's a big difference between movie courage and moral courage. See, movie courage is all about performance. It's all about, I want you to think that I'm strong, that I'm tough. I want you to be impressed with me, maybe intimidated by me. This is guys who swagger around and try to be the alpha male wherever they go. These are young men, mostly it's usually young men who fall into this particular trap, who think that courage is doing risky and reckless things. You know, jumping off high places, driving way too fast, breaking lots of laws. This is also men or women who like to brag about the fact that they have, quote, no filter. You know anybody like this? I know people like this. They'll tell you the first thing you meet them, hey, you know, just want you to understand, I have no filter, so I'm going to say what's on my mind. Don't matter if it hurts your feeling or whatever, because that's just how I am. And whenever I meet somebody like that, and I'm sorry for this is going to sound judgy, but when I meet somebody who says that, I'm always like, mentally, I'm like, okay, so you're a jerk. That's what you're telling me. You're just intentionally rude and you have no consideration for the feelings of others. Now, there's such a thing as boldness, which is a good thing, like the prophets had, like men and women of God through the centuries had. And that's when you speak the truth in love. You say hard things, even though you know it's going to make people mad, but you're speaking the things they need to hear. But what I'm talking about is, I don't care whose feelings I hurt. I'm going to be intentionally offensive, and I'm going to chalk that up to my personal courage. That's not courage. That's movie courage. Moral courage, on the other hand, is doing the right thing when it's hard. It's doing the right thing when it's the last thing you want to do. There's a scripture verse that I memorized and I taught my son when he was little because I wanted him to grow up to be courageous. And it was Proverbs 28:1. And it says, the wicked flee when no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So in God's eyes, righteousness and courage are tied together. You can't say you're being courageous if you're doing something selfish or self-serving. You're courageous when you do righteous things, when you put others first, when you rescue others, when you do what God wants you to do. And I say all that because today we're going to read a story of two very courageous people, but two of the unlikeliest heroes you would ever meet. And this is a great story. I'm enjoying telling this story because, number one, it's very cinematic. It seems like something you would make a movie out of, ironically. But secondly, it's not a well-known story. It'll probably be new to many of you. In fact, I'd never heard a sermon preached on this particular story until I preached those two this morning, okay? So I'm not the greatest preacher I know, but you're about to hear the greatest sermon on this passage I've ever heard, okay? Thank y'all for laughing at that. I'm glad you get my jokes. Now, so the setup here is, you saw last week that the king of the northern kingdom of Israel and the king of the southern kingdom of Judah, God's people were split into two nations at the time. Both of them were assassinated on the same day by a guy named Jehu. This was the judgment of God because they were both wicked men. And the queen mother in Israel, the northern kingdom, was a woman named Jezebel, who's basically an iconic name. It's basically a name that means a wicked person, a wicked woman. She was thrown from a tower on that same day and killed. Judgment of God on them, but it left a power vacuum, right? Neither nation had anyone leading them. And in the south, in Judah, the queen mother, the mother of the king that just died, was a lady named Athaliah, whose mother was Jezebel. So that setup gets you ready for 2 Kings 11, verse 1, which says, "Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family." And that tells you everything you need to know about Athaliah. Just think how wicked and depraved you have to be. You've just lost your son, and your response is to just go ahead and kill the rest of your own family. Your kids, your grandkids, put them all to death. Why? Just so that no one can challenge you as you take the throne of the nation and lead it in a way you want it to go. Now imagine living in a country where someone like that, an absolute sociopath, is your leader. And there's no Congress or Senate, there's no Supreme Court, there's no checks and balances. She calls all the shots, so you have to watch. If you're a worshiper of the Lord, you have to watch as she loots the temple of God in Jerusalem, and she takes all its treasures, and she uses all that stuff to build an altar to Baal, her god. As she persecutes faithful people across the land, as she makes a mockery of God's law, this is a dark time to be a citizen of Judah. But it gets worse than that, because if you know the Bible, you know that when David was still alive, one day Nathan the prophet came to him and he said, "David, God is making a promise to you that you will always have a man on the throne. One of your descendants will always reign over my people. And in fact, from your line will come my Messiah." So salvation was going to come through the line of David, and now it looks like the whole line of David is done. It's gone. It's been wiped out by the wicked woman Athaliah. So salvation is gone. So God has apparently forgotten his people, has abandoned Judah. It looks like all is lost. And this lasts for 6 years. But God, you know those words? But God, he had a plan. And here we're about to meet the first of his heroes. He's going to tap on the shoulder in verse 2. It says, "But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of King Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death. And she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus they hid him from Athaliah so that he was not put to death. And he remained with her 6 years, hidden in the house of the Lord, while Athaliah reigned over the land." So our first unlikely hero is a young woman, sister of the late king, who does 3 incredibly risky and courageous things right at the start of this story. First of all, she somehow manages to sneak her 1-year-old nephew away from the rest of the royal family in a way no one sees and no one notices, and he is thus spared. Secondly, she finds a place to hide him. It says bedroom, but the actual Hebrew word means like a storeroom for bedding. So this is a room in the temple where they store stuff. And she finds a place, she carves out a place for him to live, for him to grow up. She gets nurses to come and take care of him. And the third thing is she's got to keep that kid alive, that baby, that little boy alive for 6 years, and hope and pray that no one finds out. So every nurse that she brings in, every temple guard who sees her going in and out, is always a risk. One of those people is going to get suspicious or is going to rat her out, and then it's all over, and then she dies, and then the baby dies too, and the whole plan is done. But there's a second hero in the story. That's in verse 4. But in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and brought the captains of the Kerites and of the temple guards and had them come with him in the house of the Lord. And he made a covenant with them and put them under oath in the house of the Lord. And he showed them the king's son. So this second hero is a guy named Jehoiada, who's high priest of Judah at the time. And so it's his job to run things at the temple. Now, here's what you don't read in that passage, but you read later on in 2 Chronicles. Jehoiada, number one, is 100 years old, give or take. So he is an old person. He has reached that stage in life where if I get to be 100 and somebody's like, hey, we're all going to go mow the yard today, I expect to be exempt, okay? At 100 years old, I expect to be exempt from stuff like that. And Jehoiada would be well within his rights as a human to say, listen, our country has gone to hell in a handbasket, but it's not my problem. Let some young, courageous person do something, but he's the one who's going to do something. Second thing to know about Jehoiada, he's married to Jehosheba, that first hero. So the young woman who spared little King Joash's life, that's his wife. This old man married to this young woman. I know that sounds icky to us today, but what it means for us, what it means for Jehoiada is he's one of the few people who knows that the young king is still alive. And he's witnessing all this destruction that Athaliah is perpetrating, and he's biding his time, looking for the right moment for something to happen. And finally, after 6 years, he says, now's the time. Now I've got to take a stand. Now I've got to take action. And so he meets with two different groups. By the way, you might be saying, well, why doesn't he just kill her, right? Just get the best archer in the nation, pay him a substantial sum of money, have him shoot her from about 300 yards away. Deal's done. Head of the snake's cut off. Everything's fine. Well, it's not that simple. History shows that when you have an autocratic regime, right, one person ruling everything with unquestioned authority, and you take that person out, it's not like all of a sudden everything just becomes beautiful democracy and peace. Instead, what usually happens when there's a power vacuum is civil war. Factions and fighting, and thousands die, and terrible destruction. So if you've ever seen the movie Valkyrie, so it's a movie came out about 20 years ago. Tom Cruise is in it. And it's based on the true story of some German army officers in the middle of World War II who decided to overthrow Hitler, take out the Nazis, and stop the war. And if you watch that movie, you'll see it's pretty accurately done. They went to great lengths to make sure that not only if they killed him, not only would they take him out, but that the rest of the German people would rally behind them and that other nations would recognize their new ruler and stop fighting. And listen, they were highly trained, highly motivated, disciplined military men, and their plot failed. In this case, similar situation, there's an old man and a very young woman, and they're the leaders of this plot. What chance do they have? So what Jehoiada does is he first meets with this group of men called the Kerites. The Kerites were this foreign-born group of soldiers who were the bodyguards of the king, in this case, the queen. He met with the temple guards as well. This is sort of like if today you decided to plot with the FBI and the Secret Service to assassinate the president, right? Think about the risk that this man is taking. If any one of those guys rats him out, he's dead. And then beyond that, we don't read this part, but it's later on, he goes and he meets with the heads of every clan in Judah and says, listen, there's a king. He's being hidden right now. He's only 7 years old. Will you back him? If we take her out, will you back him? Will you follow the king? Again, think of the courage. If one person says the wrong thing, if one person lets slip what's going on, it all comes to a bloody end. So, verse 9 says, The captains did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath, and with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And the priest gave to the captains the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. So note the attention to detail that this man has, Jehoiada. Number one, he does this on the Sabbath day. Why? Because he knows the people who are going to gather at the temple on the Sabbath are going to be people who still worship the Lord. They're going to be people who are going to be excited to know that a son of David is still alive. They're going to rally behind him. It's going to get things off to a good start. Secondly, he does it during a shift change in the temple guard. Why? Because that way people won't be suspicious when they see a lot of soldiers milling around the temple. And third, he hands out David's old weapons, the shields and the spears and the swords. Why? It's a symbolic thing. He's saying, listen, remember who you are. Remember who we are. We're supposed to be the people of the Lord, not worshipers of Baal. This woman doesn't represent us. She's not leading us in the right direction. Be strong. Be strong like David was. Now remember, the temple was a building, but you didn't go in the building unless you were the priest. So this all takes place outside. This all takes place in the courtyard outside the temple where the altar is. Keep that in mind when we read this next part. Verse 11 says, "And the guards stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house on behalf of the king. Then he brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony." So here, picture this little 7-year-old kid standing there with his oversized crown on his head, holding a scroll that is the first 5 books of the Bible, the covenant between God and Israel. And it says they brought the king, they gave him the testimony, and they proclaimed him king and anointed him, and they clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king." So the fact that I told you this takes place outside, imagine the shouts and the clapping and the trumpet blast, they just reverberate all over that city. And guess who hears it? Yeah, the queen. And she comes running because she still thinks, in her mind, she still thinks, I'm in charge. Everybody loves me. If they don't love me, they better, because I'm in charge. They'll die if they don't. So it says in verse 13, when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she went into the house of the Lord to the people. And when she looked, there was the king standing by the pillar, according to the custom, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king, and all the people of the land rejoicing and blowing trumpets. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason, treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains who were set over the army, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to death with the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they laid hands on her, and she went through the horse's entrance to the king's house, and there she was put to death. It worked, and the people were free, and Joash reigned. Young Joash reigned for many, many years. It was one of Judah's good kings for the most part. Now, when God's people were under the thumb of an absolute psychopath, a murderous tyrant, when the plan of God to redeem the world rested on the life of a little boy, who did God tap on the shoulder and say, you need to step up and do something? It wasn't somebody who looked like John Wayne. It wasn't somebody who looked like John Wick. It was an old man and a very young woman. And these two unlikely heroes had moral courage in their hearts to do what was right, put their lives on the line, to stand up for righteousness, and therefore Judah was saved, and therefore God's plan of redemption continued, and therefore you and I are saved today. And you might say, great story, Jeff. Sounds like it'd make a great movie. What does it have to do with me? Here's what it has to do with you and me. God is on the move. God never rests. He never sleeps. This is a world full of wickedness. All you have to do is watch the news. All you have to do is just pay attention to your neighbors and your friends and how many of them are struggling and families breaking up, people fighting wars and illness and poverty and injustice all over the place. And God's job, God's full-time occupation is redeeming this world, one heart, one family at a time, bringing peace to the chaos that's all around us. And that's what we're supposed to be involved in. See, you can really measure your spirituality as a Christian, not just by how often you come to church or how much scripture you know, but are you really a part of God's redemption plan? Do you find yourself on the front lines, bringing the God's love to people who need it and making their lives better with the gospel. And that takes courage. I know lots of times it's fun. Lots of times serving the Lord is enjoyable because you're loving people who've never been loved before. You're bringing them mercy and grace that they didn't expect. That's great. But there are also times when it's dangerous. There are also times when it's risky. There are times when it's messy. There are times when it's uncomfortable. And if you don't have courage, you'll sit it out and you won't live out God's purpose for your life. So I'm going to give you really quickly a series of questions. Think of it as sort of a courage inventory, a courage survey. I want you to ask yourself the following questions. You ready for this? Number one, do I have the courage to confront a Christian friend who is going off the rails morally? And I say Christian friend specifically because if you're a Christian, if your friend is a Christian, then they claim to follow Christ. But if you see them caught in a web of addiction, if you see them destroying an important relationship through pure selfishness, if you see them turning away from the faith in some significant way, do you have the courage to go and confront them lovingly and say, I love you too much to let you keep going down this road? Second question, do I have the courage to be the first to forgive when I'm in the middle of an argument? See, our culture says if somebody comes at you, you come at them with more, right? You win the fight. But the gospel says it's better to win the person than it is to win the fight. Do you have the courage to stop shooting and forgive them first, even though they're still locked and loaded? Third question, will I be a peacemaker between two people I love? Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Do you, when you see two friends or two family members in conflict, do you have the courage to go and do your best to try to bring them together? Or do you do what everybody else does and just choose a side? Do I have the courage to stand between two people who are angry with one another when they might become angry with me? Fourth question, will I show kindness to people that are my enemies? I put that in quotes because in Christ, we shouldn't have enemies. There are going to be people that hate us. There are going to be people that treat us rudely and with cruelty, but they're not our enemies. They're people Christ died for. Do you have the courage to treat them that way? I got news for you. If you treat your enemies the way Jesus treats you, it's hard. It's not going to be easy. And you're going to get hurt sometimes in ways that you wouldn't if you kept your armor up. You might even get criticized by other people who call themselves Christians because they're going to be like, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't show weakness. You shouldn't let somebody take advantage of you. But that's what God's word says. Do you have the courage to do what's unpopular, what's hard? Next question. Do I have the courage to stand up to a bully? Will I report an abuser? There's so many evil things that happen because no one will speak up. Do you have the courage to be that person who blows the whistle, who stands between that bully and his victim? Do you have that kind of courage? The last question I want to ask you is, do I have the courage to tell an unbeliever what Jesus has done for me? And that's the most important kind of courage of all, because that's the one that makes a difference in someone's eternity. And I'm not saying you have to be the person who just shares the gospel with every person you meet. I'm a believer that God opens doors and sets divine appointments for us, and we should know when someone's ready to hear. But do you have the courage to talk about your faith with someone who doesn't yet know anything about your faith? Do you have the courage to say to the Lord, Lord, you show me who you want me to share with, and I'll share? I'll be honest with you, y'all. I'm not a naturally courageous person. I'm just not. I'm very cautious by nature. I hate confrontation. I hate conflict. I'm risk averse. There are some things that don't scare me, like getting up and preaching to you isn't scary at all to me. You may think I'm courageous because I talk in front of a bunch of people. I love doing this. That takes no courage at all. But you know what takes courage? This week I'm supposed to have my blood drawn for my doctor for my annual physical. And I'm not scared of needles, but there's some bad things that happen sometimes when you stick a needle in one of my veins. And so I'm already gripping about that. But here's what I've learned. I pray every day for courage. I pray every day that I will have the courage I need to do the right thing, to say the right thing. Never once has God taken my fears away. I wish it were that way, but it's not. John McCain, some of you know him because he ran for president about 18 years ago. But before that, he was well known as a prisoner of war. He flew combat missions over Vietnam. He was shot down, spent 5.5 years in a prison camp that they called the Hanoi Hilton, and he was tortured, he was beaten, he was treated terribly. Then the North Vietnamese found out that he was the son of an admiral, and they thought, oh, if we release him, this will make us look good to the rest of the world. He refused to be released because he knew this is going to bring positive publicity to the enemy while they're still torturing my brothers in arms. He remained in prison until the end of the war. Years later, he was asked by a reporter, how did you have so much courage? And he said, well, I actually didn't. He said, I had to learn courage. I had to grow to be courageous. He said, courage is like a muscle. If you never use it, you don't have it. But the more you use it, the stronger it grows. And that's what I've learned when I pray to the Lord for courage. It's not like I wake up the next day with the heart of a lion and I have no fears or anxieties anymore. But God directs me into situations where I'm going to need courage, and he supplies just enough so that when I get out on the other side, that muscle of courage has grown stronger. I read a story about a pastor named Mike Bro, which is kind of an interesting name, isn't it? He's Brother Bro. That's kind of weird. Reverend Bro. So anyway, Pastor Mike had a daughter when she got to be 18, graduated high school. Her name was Jody. When she graduated high school, she shocked her parents by saying, Mom, Dad, I'm not going to college, at least not yet. I volunteered to go to Haiti with a medical missionary team. And they were like, no, you're not. But she was 18, so they couldn't stop her. And she went. And she spent the year in Haiti helping people medically in the name of Christ. And there was this one point where she emailed her mom and dad and said, I just want to tell you about something that happened this week. I got this phone call, woke me up in the middle of the night, because there was a woman in our village that was giving birth, and they wanted a woman there to assist. She said, I've seen labor and delivery. I've never assisted. I've never, delivered a baby, but I went and I just prayed all the way. And she said, I got there. And when I got there, there were all these people in that little house. And there's this woman on the floor, and she's in heavy, heavy contractions. And there's this voodoo priestess that's shown up. And she's in all of her garb, and she's chanting, and she's sprinkling all this stuff, this ointment all over the room and on this woman. And she's staring at me because she knows I'm a Christian. And she's looking at me very hatefully. And eventually she just goes and stands at the woman's head and just stares a hole in me as if to say, what are you going to do about it? And so little 18-year-old Jody goes to the feet of this pregnant woman and looks that priestess in the eyes. And she doesn't know what else to do, so she just starts to sing. And here's what she sings. She sings, our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. And when she sings, this priestess just comes unglued and grabs all her stuff and just basically sprints out of that place. And Jody is there and is able to help deliver this baby. And she writes to her mom and dad, and she says, I didn't know what else to do. I just knew that this child needed to be born under the blessing of God and not the curse of the devil. And so here's Pastor Mike and his wife, and they're reading this, and they immediately start to type out a message that's like, get on a plane and come home right now. You're 18 stinking years old. You shouldn't be put in positions like this. Who's in charge of this medical mission team that you found yourself in this position? This is not right. And then they stopped, and they're like, okay, who are we to tell her she has to come home? God's clearly using her. This is clearly where he wants her to be. We need to have the courage to let her do God's will. And I can tell you as a parent, it's one thing for me to do something risky, but for my kids to do something risky takes a whole different kind of courage. And then I think about God the Father sending his one and only Son, not just to Haiti, but to this whole messed up, wicked world, knowing that sending him means watching him die. Sending him means watching him give his life for us. And God did that. And Christ the Son did that. And you want to know what courage looks like? Read the story of the cross. And so when you lack courage, as I think most of us would admit we do, he's the one you go to. You don't just wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to be brave today. You don't chant slogans to yourself. You don't listen to some real pump up music. That's not going to work. You come to the Lord and you say, Lord, make me courageous. And you pray it every day. And then you watch what God can do.